NASA's latest discovery has left the world stunned. An object drifting near Jupiter, behaving unlike anything we've ever seen. A comet with no tail, no water, only a massive red cloud of gas expanding silently through space. It's not just a comet, it's something far stranger, far more mysterious. And if it isn't a comet, then what is it? This discovery has already shattered our understanding of the cosmos, and what's to come may be even more shocking. Prepare for a revelation that could change everything we thought we knew about the universe. The object, which was later cataloged as 3 Atlas, became the third interstellar object ever discovered by humanity. This was a monumental moment in scientific history. Before Atlas, only 2 interstellar objects had been confirmed to pass through our solar system: Oumuamua, which was spotted in 2017, and Borisov, which was discovered in 2019. These 2 discoveries were groundbreaking because they revealed for the first time that objects from outside our solar system routinely pass through our cosmic neighborhood, a discovery that captured the imagination of astronomers and the public alike. When Atlas was first detected by NASA's Spherex telescope, astronomers were initially optimistic that it would behave like Borisov, a comet that had wandered into the solar system from deep space. After all, comets are relatively predictable. They travel in elliptical orbits around the sun, and as they get closer, the sun's heat causes the ice on their surface to sublimate, turning it into gas. This process produces the characteristic glowing tail that makes comets visible even from Earth. Comets are known to contain a significant amount of water, and their tails are generally made up of water vapor and dust particles, stretching out into space behind them. But the first observations of Atlas quickly revealed that this was no ordinary comet. Instead of the expected water-rich coma, the cloud of gas that surrounds a comet's nucleus, Atlas was venting only carbon dioxide, a gas that is much less common in comets at this distance from the sun. There were no visible jets of water, no sparkling trail of dust, just a smooth, expanding shell of carbon dioxide surrounding the object. This was a significant deviation from the norm, and it raised immediate questions. At 2.2 astronomical units from the Sun, roughly the distance of Jupiter's orbit, water is typically the dominant substance that a comet releases. It's generally the gas that drives the formation of a comet's coma, and it's typically the most abundant substance around comets in this part of the solar system. Carbon dioxide is also present, but it's usually a minor player, released in much smaller quantities compared to water. Yet, in the case of Atlas, carbon dioxide was not only the dominant gas, but it was being released in massive amounts, far more than any comet observed at this distance. This stark contrast between what was expected and what was actually observed led astronomers to reconsider their assumptions. Something about Atlas was completely different, and they were beginning to realize that this was no ordinary comet. The object was behaving in ways that didn't fit into the typical cometary models, and it was proving to be an enigmatic mystery for scientists. One of the most striking features of Atlas was its coma. Instead of the usual pale, translucent glow seen around most comets, Atlas's coma had a deep blood-red hue, and it was massive. The coma was almost 348,000 kilometers across, which is roughly the distance from Earth to the Moon. This vast bubble of gas surrounding the object was unlike anything that had been observed around a comet before. And unlike the chaotic, irregular comas of typical comets, Atlas's coma appeared smooth, uniform, and nearly perfectly spherical. It was an eerily calm structure, one that did not match the unpredictable, turbulent nature of comets we had come to know. When the first spectral data came in, it was clear that the coma wasn't composed of water vapor and dust, as most comets are. Instead, it was made almost entirely of carbon dioxide. This was a significant discovery, especially considering that at 2.2 astronomical units from the Sun, water sublimation should have been the dominant process. Water ice should have been turning directly into gas, creating a visible jet of gas and dust. But with Atlas, this wasn't the case. The carbon dioxide coma was not only larger, but also different in composition, with no visible jets of water or dust, and it appeared unusually organized. Astronomers were left trying to explain this mystery. The sheer scale of the coma was difficult to ignore. Its size was truly astonishing. For context, a comet's coma is typically caused by the sun's heat causing the release of gas from the comet's icy surface. But in Atlas's case, the structure of the coma didn't behave like anything seen before. The smoothness of the coma, its symmetrical expansion, and its deep red hue all raised more questions than answers. It wasn't just the absence of water. It was the uniformity and stability of the gas surrounding Atlas that suggested something far stranger was at play. It was as if Atlas was intentionally maintaining the coma, rather than simply allowing the gas to escape chaotically as we've seen with other comets. Astronomers compared Atlas's coma to those of comets from other parts of the solar system, such as the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud, which sometimes release more carbon dioxide than water. But even the comets from those regions didn't produce a coma of this size or this perfect symmetry. Some researchers described it as unsettlingly calm, almost as if it had been intentionally structured, defying the unpredictable nature that we normally associate with cometary activity. This led to several theories. One theory posited that carbon dioxide, being more volatile than water, was escaping first. It could act as a thermal blanket, cooling the surface of the object and preventing the water ice beneath it from sublimating. Another explanation suggested that the water ice was much deeper under the surface, possibly hidden beneath layers of dust and frozen compounds that sunlight couldn't penetrate. But neither of these theories seemed to fully explain what was happening. The coma's symmetry was too perfect, too structured, to simply be a random byproduct of a comet's outgassing. The mystery deepened further when scientists turned their attention to Atlas's nucleus, the solid core at the heart of the object. Early estimates made by the Hubble Space Telescope suggested that the nucleus of Atlas was relatively small, somewhere between 300 and 500 meters across. This was consistent with what one might expect from an icy fragment drifting through space. But when SPHEREX, NASA's infrared telescope, began collecting spectra, the data painted an entirely different picture. Instead of detecting a faint, unremarkable nucleus, SPHEREX picked up a huge flux of reflected light at the 1-micron wavelength. The intensity of this reflected light was so strong that scientists had to run the models multiple times to make sure the data was accurate. The conclusion was shocking. The nucleus of Atlas was not 300 to 500 meters wide, as previously thought, but was actually closer to 46 kilometers across. That's right, 46 kilometers, making it over 90 times the size of Borisov, the previous interstellar comet. This finding was extraordinary. A nucleus of that size would make Atlas larger than 90% of the comets ever observed. The implications were immense, but they also raised more questions. If Atlas really was 46 kilometers wide, why had it remained invisible for so long? Shouldn't it have been detected much earlier, long before SPHEREX came online? The idea that Atlas could be so large was puzzling. Astronomers had expected it to be much smaller, and there was no clear explanation for why such a large object had gone unnoticed. Some researchers speculated that the light detected by SPHEREX wasn't coming from the nucleus at all, but from microscopic particles in the coma. These particles could have been reflecting sunlight in ways that made the nucleus appear much larger than it really was. However, when scientists looked at the pattern of the reflected light, they found something unusual. Instead of the jagged, uneven profile that would come from dust-scattering sunlight, the reflectivity curve was smooth and symmetrical. This suggested that the surface of the object, or whatever was reflecting the light, was much more regular than a natural comet nucleus would be. One of the first major puzzles revolved around the fact that Atlas wasn't releasing water in the quantities expected of a comet at this distance from the Sun, at 2.2 astronomical units away. Just beyond the orbit of Mars and approaching the orbit of Jupiter, comets typically release a substantial amount of water vapor as their icy surfaces begin to sublimate. A comet of Atlas's size should have been producing jets of water vapor, stretching out a visible tail across the cosmos. Yet, observations confirm that only 4.5 kilograms of water vapor were being released each second, far less than the 40 to 50 kilograms expected from similar objects at this distance. This discrepancy was alarming. It wasn't just that there was less water than expected. It was that the water appeared to be trapped beneath the surface, or prevented from sublimating by some unknown factor. Two leading theories emerged to explain the absence of water vapor. The first proposed that the large amounts of carbon dioxide being released from the object were acting as a cooling agent. The carbon dioxide gas, which was vented from the surface in massive quantities, could be cooling the object's outer layers, preventing the water ice beneath from reaching the necessary temperature to sublimate. This theory suggested that the carbon dioxide was acting like a thermal blanket, keeping the surface cool enough to prevent the sublimation of water. In this scenario, the water was still present beneath the surface, but it was kept hidden by the thick layer of gas. Another explanation posited that the water was trapped beneath layers of dust or frozen carbon compounds on the object's surface. If this was the case, sunlight would not have been able to penetrate deeply enough to heat the water ice beneath. The dust or carbon compounds might have been insulating the water, effectively locking it away from the sun's warmth and preventing it from sublimating. While this theory could explain the absence of water vapor, it raised new questions about the composition of Atlas. Why would such a thick layer of dust and frozen compounds form on the surface? And why would Atlas, a relatively small object, have accumulated such an insulating layer? Despite the plausibility of these theories, something about them didn't feel quite right. The behavior of Atlas was simply too deliberate, too consistent. As researchers continued to study the data, they started to notice that the object didn't just lack water, it was behaving as if it was actively suppressing the release of water. The smooth, symmetrical coma surrounding the object gave the impression that it was being intentionally maintained, not merely created by the random sublimation of ices. The coma's even, almost perfect spherical shape was unlike anything seen in ordinary comets. In the case of most comets, their comas are messy and chaotic, the result of gas and dust being ejected unpredictably from the object's surface. Atlas's coma, however, looked almost calm, as if it was being controlled in some way. This led some scientists to entertain more radical hypotheses. What if the coma's symmetry wasn't the result of random outgassing, but of a deliberate process? Could the object be engineered rather than simply being a natural comet? The idea of a natural comet exhibiting such controlled, symmetrical behavior began to seem increasingly unlikely. The more researchers looked at Atlas, the more it began to feel like something other than just a comet. Theories about its structure, its behavior, and its composition all pointed to the possibility that Atlas might not be a comet at all. What if it were something manufactured? Something designed with purpose rather than formed by natural processes? The mystery deepened when astronomers turned their attention to Atlas's nucleus. Early observations suggested that the nucleus of the object was relatively small, between 300 and 500 meters across. This was typical for interstellar objects, and it fit the expected size for a comet or small asteroid. However, when SphereX's infrared sensors took a closer look, they found something completely unexpected. Instead of a faint, unremarkable nucleus, the telescope detected an intense burst of reflected light. This was highly unusual, as comets typically have dark, irregular nuclei that reflect very little light. The intensity of the light reflected by Atlas was so great that the initial data seemed impossible. Further analysis confirmed a startling conclusion. The nucleus of Atlas was not 300 to 500 meters wide, but was actually around 46 kilometers in diameter. This was a massive difference. 46 kilometers was larger than 90% of all comets ever observed. If the nucleus of Atlas was truly 46 kilometers across, it would be an extraordinary discovery. It would make Atlas one of the largest comets ever observed, far larger than any other interstellar object detected. But this new data raised even more questions. If Atlas was so large, why had it remained undetected for so long? Shouldn't a nucleus of that size have been visible much earlier? The fact that Atlas had remained hidden until SphereX detected it only added to the mystery. Some scientists suggested that the light detected by SphereX wasn't coming directly from the nucleus, but was being reflected by the coma. The small particles in the coma could be reflecting sunlight, making the nucleus appear larger than it actually was. This could explain why Atlas had gone unnoticed for so long. But even this theory didn't account for all of the data. The reflectivity of the light coming from Atlas appeared too smooth, too symmetrical. It didn't match the chaotic light patterns one would expect from a comet's dusty coma. As scientists worked to unravel the mystery of Atlas's nucleus, the object's behavior continued to challenge existing models of comets. If the nucleus was much larger than expected, why hadn't it been detected earlier? And if the coma was reflecting light in such a controlled, uniform manner, what did that say about the nature of Atlas itself? Some researchers began to entertain even more radical theories. Could Atlas be something engineered rather than a natural object? Was it possible that Atlas was not a comet at all, but a piece of technology, perhaps even a probe, created by an intelligence from another star system? These ideas, of course, were highly speculative. Most of the scientific community continued to favor natural explanations for Atlas's strange behavior. But the possibility that Atlas was not a natural object couldn't be entirely ruled out. The more data came in, the more it seemed that Atlas was behaving like something designed, not formed. The mystery deepened with each new discovery, and scientists found themselves caught between two conflicting theories. On the one hand, Atlas could be a natural outlier, an extreme case of a comet formed in a different star system with a different mix of chemical compounds. On the other hand, it could be something far stranger, something artificial, created by an advanced civilization with technology far beyond our own. As if all of this wasn't enough, Atlas's behavior was further complicated by the silence surrounding its discovery. When NASA first collected data on Atlas, there was little fanfare. Unlike previous interstellar discoveries, which had been widely publicized and celebrated, Atlas's discovery was kept relatively quiet. There were no press conferences, no major announcements. Instead, the information was quietly published in a blog update, with little urgency or excitement. This silence was unusual, and it quickly became a source of speculation. Some scientists argued that NASA was simply following its standard protocol, waiting for the data to be verified before making any public statements. Others believed that NASA was trying to avoid sparking unnecessary speculation before all the facts were in. However, some astronomers found this silence to be unsettling. The object was, after all, only the third interstellar object humanity had ever detected, and its behavior was unlike anything seen before. Why wasn't NASA treating it as the groundbreaking discovery it appeared to be? The silence surrounding Atlas had echoes of a similar event that occurred in 2017 when Oumuamua was discovered. That object, like Atlas, defied the usual characteristics of a comet, and its strange behavior led some scientists to speculate that it might be an artificial probe rather than a natural object. Like Atlas, Oumuamua's discovery was downplayed initially, and it wasn't until much later that the public learned the full extent of what had been discovered. Could the silence surrounding Atlas be a sign that something more extraordinary was being concealed? As the mystery of Atlas continued to unfold, the question remained, what exactly was this object? Was it a strange comet with unusual chemistry, or was it something else entirely? The discovery of Atlas had already broken many of the rules of comet science, and the more scientists learned about it, the stranger it became. Some still believed that Atlas was a natural object, albeit one that defied our understanding of how comets behave. Others, however, began to entertain the possibility that Atlas was something artificial, something designed and engineered rather than formed by the forces of nature.